the Clemson Dubcast. It is Friday, January 20th, the morning of Friday, January 20th. Just put the finishing touches on a load of content for the weekend at TigerIllustrated.com. Some really thought-provoking subjects that Paul Strelo and I tackled, including some predictions for the football team for 2023. So check that out if you already haven't. My good friends Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold have been part of the podcast since the beginning, way back in August of 2018. They have an accomplished team of personal injury attorneys at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold based in Greenville. They are Clemson people, and their skillful attorneys have decades of experience in complicated litigation matters, taking a special interest in medical malpractice, nursing home abuse and neglect, car accident cases that have left the individuals involved in serious trouble. For a free consultation at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold, call 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. That's PARHAM law.com. Solero Communications, formerly known as Tandem Payment, is a full-service integrated electronic payments provider powered by leading-edge technology. Solero provides a wide array of merchant solutions, simplified payments. They make onboarding, taking payments, maintaining risk management and compliance, and getting support quick and easy. At Solero, they're all about helping you achieve sustainable growth as a business. Taking payments isn't the only thing your business needs. With Solero's solutions, you can manage inventory, sell products and services via social media, schedule staff, track sales, get reports, and much, much more. Find out more about Solero at solerocommerce.com. That's CELERO commerce.com. Another loyal supporter of the Dubcast is Blackacre Law Firm in Greenville, a subsidiary of Parham, Smith, and Archenhold. Blackacre helps South Carolina residents achieve their dreams of home ownership by providing experienced professional representation for real estate closings. Attention to detail is crucial in real estate law. Blackacre is committed to making sure nothing gets by them preparing residential or commercial closings. Blackacre also offers estate planning services for their clients in the Greenville area. Find out more about Blackacre at 864-326-3507. Okay, to our conversation, Fred Cunningham of WSPA. Man, he's been around since 1984 when he came from Indiana. I had no idea. And wait until you hear about this guy's schedule and routine for getting ready for his morning show that starts at 4:30 a.m. Really interesting look into the life of this upstate television personality. Here we go. Enjoy. Okay, joined by Fred Cunningham, who was actually recommended by Mickey Plyler on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, I guess. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. It's a lot of fun to get a chance to talk to you at the risk in the opening seconds of sucking up to the host too much. I'm a fan of your work, both print and on the great website, and I'm a fan of this podcast. So it's actually really fun to get a chance to be on it.
That's really flattering. Thank you. Well, I'm interested. So you read my writing and you listen to the podcast. Are you? I mean, you haven't been involved in sports coverage in at least a decade, right?
Well, it's actually been full time. It's been even longer than that. I made the switch from full time sports at Channel 7 to news. It'll be 21 years early next month. But at the same time, while I switched off of doing sports full time, I actually got a lot of opportunities to do stuff in sports on my own time that I never would have had otherwise. But for the most part, yeah, the day-to-day stuff, I've been out of it for a long time.
But you do like play-by-play, the TV stuff for basketball and things like that?
Yeah, I've been doing, it really started for me. I was out of it for about a year. And then, do you remember the old CSS network?
Yes.
There was, they used to do replays of football games from, this was a precursor to what is now the SEC network. And Clemson was one of the schools in which they would take a 3-hour game and cut it down to three and a half hour game and cut it down to just a couple of hours, counting commercials. And so they would produce about half of those games on their own. And they called me and asked me to do those games. And so I did those for a number of years. Started doing some charter high school football with Mickey. They had been doing it for a long time, but that play-by-play job opened up, and I did it with Mickey for about 8 years, and then just some other little things here and there. Really what I do right now, just as far as sports goes, some of the Clemson streaming stuff with Clemson Video, and Rick Bagby does such a great job over there. So I get a chance to do some, in the fall, I do a lot of volleyball, some soccer, women's basketball, and then hopefully gearing up for baseball and softball here, in just a few weeks now.
Not to get too far into the weeds on the CSS thing, but just I'm interested to learn the reason that is no longer a thing. I would presume is because it's from the advent of conference networks, and that's their inventory now, where they have the rights to all that. Am I even close to right on that?
You are dead on that. Yes, that was my understanding as well, because that really was their inventory. They would do Georgia Tech, Clemson, Miami. I'm trying to remember now if South Carolina was involved in that or not. One of the problems I have is that I was not a charter customer at that time, and I'm still not. I'm on DirecTV, so I never actually got to watch it. I had to, if I ever wanted to see my work, I had to go over to my in-laws' house to check it out over there. But that was basically what happened, was that as soon as the SEC network and the conference network started coming along, it chewed up their inventory. It was a channel that was only available on charter, but it was a lot of fun. I did games. It always depended on the carrier, and I can't remember the breakdown, but if ABC or ESPN was doing the Clemson game that week, I think I would do that game. And if it was the old Jefferson Pilot, that they would just take that broadcast, which meant I actually got to go on some road games. As a matter of fact, the last game I did for CSS before they couldn't do any more regular season games was at Boston College, and it was Dabo Sweeney's first victory.
Oh, wow.
So,
unforgettable.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, who knew? And they still stayed in the business of doing spring football games, and I still did a few more spring games after that, until then SEC networks and ACC networks came along and gobbled all that up.
I have these memories of in the 80s and 90s, and we'll get into when you came along in 1984, when you arrived to the Palmetto State, which is fascinating in its own right, but they would show, I mean, obviously you didn't have you had like one game during the day.
Yes.
And then for some games, they would show them at like 11 o'clock at night. I remember watching replays of the Clemson South Carolina game late night after listening to them on the radio that day, or going to watch them on closed circuit television at the Coliseum. Just crazy how things have changed.
Oh, it's so night and day. When I became a sports fan, really, I say it's 1969, because I can remember watching actual games or remembering it and starting to remember names and that kind of thing. And you're right. ABC was the only it was the only network that had college football. So you got one game a day, except for, I think, the last of the regular season. They would give you Michigan, Ohio State, followed by Southern Cal, UCLA, and that usually determined who was going to play in the Rose Bowl. And that was it. And then, a few other things kind of came on. I think that there was a little bit more of that in the South, but in the Midwest, that was about it. You mentioned the Clemson replays. I grew up some on seeing Notre Dame replays. Not that I'm a Tim Beret Notre Dame fan, but you had Lindsey Nelson, who was a famous announcer back in those days, and they would do the same thing. They would take the Saturday Notre Dame game and they would show it like late Sunday night. And you always heard Lindsey say something along the lines of they had to edit for time. And you would hear him say, after an exchange of punts, we moved to action later in the third quarter. And for CSS, I actually had to say something similar to that, just more generic, because you never knew when they were going to cut. I can give you one CSS game that I have on tape. It's on a VHS tape. I think I've got one recorder or one machine that still works. it was when they had the multiple overtime game against Miami at Death Valley. And what was that? Maybe 2006,
05.
05. Thank you. And I can't believe how that game would have been fit into a 2-hour window just with all the overtimes.
Yeah, no doubt. So it's interesting. You're there, and also the main broadcaster that day is ABC, the live broadcaster, but you have two totally different broadcasts. Pretty interesting stuff. Kind of a relic to look back on.
Absolutely.
Now. So do you do this, all these extracurricular things, do you do them just to stay involved? Do you do it because you just love it? Do you do it for the money? All of the above, some of the above? Kind of explain this.
All of the above, actually. I would do all of the above. I mean, it's a little extra money here and there, which is good, but it kind of scratches that itch. I grew up wanting to be a sportscaster. From when I was a young age, I wanted a TV sportscaster to be specific. And because I would see those guys on the 6 and the 11 o'clock news, and I thought, they get paid to go cover these games. I want to do that. And this was back at a time when the local sportscaster and the local newspaper columnists were, there was no sports talk radio, and or at least very, very limited, nothing like what you have today. So I kind of grew up with that kind of thinking, and I got to do that for 18 years between Columbia and almost all the rest of it here. But just a time came for me that I decided that I had seen a lot of great stuff, but it was more kind of a family decision for me. But to a more regular schedule, although my hours are incredibly irregular. But I still love doing it and still am interested in it. So, yeah, I take those opportunities, not an overwhelming amount, but just enough to kind of keep busy and still see a lot of the people that, I saw back in those days. That's a lot of fun. And it just really kind of was some different opportunities that I'd never had a chance to do. I mean, I got to shoot a part in a movie, as a matter of fact, during kind of that extracurricular free time. Well, we
can't just not say the movie. It's just Talladega Nights, really? Right.
That's what it was. Yeah. I got to shoot a scene with Will Ferrell. It was back in 2005. The movie came out the next year. We shot up at Charlotte Motor Speedway. I had a friend of our family is a talent agent and works in Chester, and called me and said, they're looking for people, for this. I think you should go and audition for it. So I did, and I went to the audition. I thought I was awful, but she called me back. They said, no, they liked you. They want you to come back. And so they eventually cast me as a sports reporter. My character's name was Scott Benshaw. I don't know where that came from, but I went and I was there for about a night and a day. I went up there the day before we shot because I had to go to wardrobe. And I came there just from doing the noon news. So I was still wearing khaki pants and a blue dress shirt and a tie. And they said, we like that. Just come back dressed like that tomorrow. So, but I spent the night and then went out and shot this scene the next day. I'm in the scene. Well, I take that back. I shot the scene. Do you remember when he signs the baby's head?
Oh, yeah.
He signs Amy Adams' head. And I'm in that scene before all of that happens because I'm explaining that over the course of time, the guy who had hired Ricky Bobby had died and that there were rumors of a Formula One driver that was coming in. So I did all of that. That all got cut out, but I did make the first trailer. And the only line you hear me say, I ad-lib. He said, you want me to sign your microphone? I said, feel free. That was my 2 seconds of fame, but I still get some residual checks for that. I get about 4 times a year. I get a check for anywhere from $8 to $12.
So what was your agreement? What was you have a certain percentage of the earnings?
Yeah.
0.000.
Everybody gets some kind of residuals, I guess. I have a hunch that Will's payments are a little higher than mine, but it was a really fun. He was a really cool guy because so I get there and they had like you waited. I said technically it was a trailer, but it was like a tiny room that was like larger than a bathroom. And I sat there and they finally, about 2 hours later, they knock on the door. They said, okay, we're ready. And they've got a golf cart, and I sit down and they say, okay, we're just waiting for Will. And I'm like, uh-oh. And he comes around the corner with like 2 assistants, and then he leaves them. He hops on the cart next to me and just says, hi, I'm Will Ferrell. And it took us about a 5-minute drive over, and he could not have been nicer.
And did you say where this was? I'm sorry.
I shot it at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and they shot it right in the fall of 2005. So it was right around the time of when they would have the fall race there. The not the Coke 600, whatever that fall race was, back when they used the oval. The other fun thing I got to do was they actually did a table read of the script. And they did that in August, before they started shooting, and they have the whole cast there, and you basically read through the whole script, and they got the crew there, and they're just start trying to judge what works and what doesn't. And I read about 7 parts that day, but like the whole cast was there for that. So you had Sacha Baron Cohen and Amy Adams and John C. Reilly and Farrell's there. And they had me read about 6 or 7 different small parts, but I'll never forget that. That was also really, really fun.
So broadcasting is really, really hard, at least from my vantage point, whether it's on camera or behind a radio microphone. And I guess I'll share this. I've never shared this, and I don't want to make this about me, but I think you'd be entertained by it. Barely graduate high school. Really had no idea what I wanted to do. The only thing I could do was string a sentence together. So I go to journalism school at South Carolina, but still thinking, I could maybe do the broadcasting thing. Freshman year, I'm a host for the campus radio station, WUSC, I guess it was called, and just music. But then caught on with somebody, and we were doing women's basketball games, and we would alternate. I'd be the color guy, he'd be the analyst, and then flip-flop the next game. And I was terrible at preparation. I was terrible at pronouncing names. Just had no clue. Zero freaking clue. I was probably the other guy probably hated me because he would go to travel for a road game, and I'd be the station manager, the one who's controlling when they sign off and all that. I would sign off, during his post-game monologue because I was ready to go out and party and stuff like that. Just awful, awful stuff. His name was Frank Johnson, and if he's listening, I heartily apologize for being such a flaky, terrible person. But my point is, and I think you said you had that revelation. Wow, people get paid to do this. I had that revelation when observing other writers doing their thing, newspaper writers, and that was really what was my, big calling. And so I'm just wondering, from your observations, is kind of the personalities of broadcasters and writers, at least in my experience, couldn't be more different because writers are generally more introverted, broadcasters more extroverted, of course. Do you see the same thing through all your years of being in this industry, of being around the sports coverage in this state? Just interested to get your take on observing the different sort of silos of media that you've seen. And I guess we could also get into the wild evolutions that have happened over the last couple of decades as well, with newspapers sort of losing their hold on everything.
First of all, I think your observations are all dead on. I do think that there were great differences back when I was really in sports in the 80s and 90s and just into the early 2000s. Yes, broadcasters, sports guys, were used to being kind of that loud, and sometimes, there are some who kind of do the ego shtick a little bit. that are the Warner Wolves of the world and that kind of thing. So you're always going to be kind of boisterous. You're always kind of maybe on, although I don't think you can do that faking your personality. I don't think you can just be introverted as a sportscaster and then just show up at a place and try to take on a new personality. I think you just have to be who you are. Whereas I think, yes, newspaper, print media back then was a little quieter like that. But I had great friends on both sides of it, and we approached the jobs differently. But I mean, there were even some great personalities who were writers who were still kind of low key. And I think you worked with one of them, the late, great Ken Berger.
Yeah, definitely not an introvert.
Yeah, exactly. But not, I don't think he was big like, well, now the more I start to think about it, sometimes, because he would do picks on TV with Warren Pepper, because I saw them do that a lot because we would cross paths covering things like the Braves and the World Series, or we would see each other at the Masters and that kind of thing. He probably had as big of a personality for a strictly print guy that I can really recall.
No doubt.
But there were some differences, I think, certainly back then. There was some old school guys who just had no time for TV and let you know it. And then, okay, I like to sneak in, get my 2 or 3 questions or get the 2 or 3 answers I'm looking for, and then get out of their way. I always tried to be very respectful, but, there was a little bit of that. But you're also, I think, dead on where we're coming to now, because I used to think that there were 3 definite lanes as far as media went. There was print that could go into great detail, that could do a lot of interviews over the phone, which back at that time was not really something that you wanted to do for broadcast. I think sometimes print could get a little better answer out of some people, because it's one thing for an individual, a coach or a player to talk to you and you're just talking, and then I would come in with lights and a camera, and then you start thinking about, well, how do I look, and that kind of thing. And I think that newspapers had that advantage. TV could show you at that time what newspapers were talking about. That was our advantage. And then radio, back when you had more kind of radio news had immediacy. Radio news could interrupt that song by Fleetwood Mac to bring you this important news update. So we all had kind of our 3 lanes, but I think you're leading into how they've all kind of merged, and now everybody does a little bit of everything. And obviously with Webb making the tremendous difference on that.
So funny you mentioned Ken Berger being, sort of against the grain, and he would work every room that he was in.
Mm-hmm.
Such a large personality. I remember when I was first starting out professionally at the Augusta paper for 4 or 5 years, and then for the Post and Courier for 4 or 5 more, as you're trying to figure out who you are, and you're not as comfortable in your own skin. I had observed Ken all these years, and I'm thinking, oh, that's what I have to be, and so I'm trying to be the guy in press rooms, make cracking jokes that aren't nearly as funny as his, and trying to come up with one-liners and, hey, how's it going? And, being this outgoing personality. And then at some point I figured out, man, just be who you are, and who I am is just more of an introverted, but try to be nice to people, but just not the life of the press room, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And and Ken did that without being, he wasn't bouncing off the walls. He was more wit and kind of sly in a way, but still a really big and really interesting personality. I got to know him from, there was the old, and I guess they did this in all the leagues, but they had the ACC tour that you would do right prior to football season. And basically all the writers would be on a bus and you would go to campus. That back then it was only 8 or 9 stops. So it was a little bit more reasonable than you would possibly do it today. And from the TV end of it, we split that up with a guy I was working with by the name of Paul Jackson. And Paul was rooming with Ken. So when I kind of traded off, Ken was my roommate. Now, I knew him already, but he was great. And we just had so much fun. I still remember very fondly. We were, I think, in Raleigh, maybe the night before doing NC State, and there was a preseason NFL game on, and the Broncos were playing. The South Carolina fans are about to get really upset with me. So rookie quarterback Todd Ellis comes into the game. And I think he handed off, and I think he handed off a second time and threw an incomplete pass. And that was his night. And then he was cut at the very next cut, which may have been a day or two later. And Berger brought that up all the time, that we watched the entire Todd Ellis NFL career together.
That is fantastic.
His joke, not mine. But but he was great. He was just so much fun. I'll tell you one other thing, and you'll probably appreciate this. You know, in the Low Country, he knew everybody. And I always had some friends back when I was single before I got married, and a bunch of my friends from the North in April loved to come down for the Heritage, at Hilton Head. And we would always play golf at some point during that trip. And this was back when, you know, the Ocean Course at Kiel was the thing. And he got us on the Ocean Course. And so my friends thought I was the biggest deal. So the next year they're going like, can you get us on there again? So I asked him, and he was great and got us on again. Well, the next year they want to get on again. But I had planned ahead of time. And I had started to talk to some of the people down there, and I got to the point where I was able to get on by myself that last time. But I saw Berger at the next event. He said, like, so you don't need me anymore to get on the golf course. So he even knew that I got on my own. He wasn't at the golf course that day, but somehow he had the information. So he was great.
The clout of the newspaper columnist has been severely diminished. And I guess you could say the same thing, the clout of the newspaper beat writer. But I guess let's just keep it to columnists as being sort of representative. You know, back in the day, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, you had really prominent voices, columnist voices in Charleston, Ken Berger, and also Gene Sapikoff has been the columnist there for a long time. You had in Columbia, you had Ron Morris, Herman Helms, Bob Gillespie, I guess, was a columnist technically, but I don't know if he was necessarily a big opinion guy. You had Dan Foster up here, followed by Bart Wright, and I'm probably missing some. You also had some Charlotte Observer columnists who would venture down. Tom Sorensen was probably a prominent part of the... Ron Green, yeah, prominent parts of the discourse down here. And I remember probably the most vivid memory I have of that sort of clout is their voices and opinions meaning something was I was sitting beside Ken Berger in the 2006 Music City Bowl, Clemson versus Kentucky. And that season under Tommy Bowden had sort of fallen apart late in the year after they were, I forgot the record, maybe 7-1. After beating Georgia Tech at home with College Game Day, and C.J. Spiller and James Davis were the big stage guys. Right. And at that point, Game Day and all that wasn't really a common thing at Clemson. They went on and get hammered at Virginia Tech on a Thursday night.
Yeah, for like 4 or 5 days later, yeah.
Yep, lose at home to Maryland, I believe it was. Lose at home to South Carolina, and then they're getting their butts kicked by Kentucky in the Music City Bowl. And Ken Berger, as he was, as his routine, he's writing his column early before the game ends. But his lead paragraph he showed me. He says, Larry, take a look at this, and it basically says Clemson needs to fire Tommy Bowden now, or something to that effect, basically.
Wow! And
it was like, whoa! And you just knew how big that was, that Ken Berger was calling for the firing of Clemson's head coach. Whereas now, I mean, not that wouldn't generate a stir, probably on social media, but now if I'm the head coach of a football team and a columnist calls for my firing, I don't know that I'm really that. It just doesn't have the impact that it did back then. And so what do you make of this transformation in sort of I don't want to say powerful voices, but the prominent voices. Just sort of, there's been a almost total change in how that landscape. And on top of that, I think the state of South Carolina has one newspaper columnist now, Gene Sepikoff. I don't want to insult anybody, but I can't think of any others.
I can't think of any others either. And Gene's been there a long time, but yeah, he's the only one I can think of. I know Greenville, Anderson, Spartanburg, I think they're all basically the same paper. The state newspaper does not have one. I think the Gene is the only one that I'm aware of. And apologies to if there's a smaller town that does have a columnist, but maybe only prints or posts a couple of times a week. I think that the big thing is just the number of voices that have grown and the number of sources that you can go to get this kind of commentary. And the internet has helped spread that a little bit. My comparison might be this. When I was a kid, the world's biggest sportscaster was Howard Cosell. And he became a monster celebrity thanks to Monday Night Football. And it's like, did you hear what Cosell said last night? And Cosell could shake up the sports world with a single comment or a single commentary. And people ask, what would it be like if he was here today? And my thinking is that he would just be another voice in the crowd, because ESPN's got 400 shows with sports writers or columnists who are yelling at each other, and they've got these morning shows with Stephen A. Smith or Bayless over on Fox. I mean, you just get so inundated with it that I think it's just those prominent voices now have so many other, I don't want to say competition, because most of those I don't think compete with the kind of columnists that we're talking about. But I just think that there's just so much noise out there, and people can also kind of steer toward what they want to hear. Your website is, I think, a great example of that. They don't have to wait and see what the Atlanta paper might say about Clemson or report about Clemson. I'll go to your website and check it out there. And I think here's another compliment coming your way, but I do mean this. One of the great things I like about your writing is that you don't blow smoke up them when it's not warranted. You're not going to come down on the hammer, but I think you're very honest in saying what you think about where the program stands, and especially a year like this when they had double-digit wins, and yet at the same time there were some tough observations that I think had to be made. I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's just there's just so much chatter out there, and you can kind of find, and I think this probably even spills over into politics. You don't have to wait to find out what George Will says on This Week, because there's 4 million places where you can get commentary.
Yeah, opinions are a dime a dozen. I think back to the 80s and 90s, the sports reporters on ESPN on Sunday mornings, and you had Bill Conlon, who this cantankerous, just surly, don't ever question anything I say, I'm always right. I mean, he can do that, whereas now if he were in that role, people would be like, who in the world is that guy? But back then he was an esteemed sports writer. His opinion mattered. Mike Lupica. I just think so many of those guys have lost their foothold because opinions are everywhere, just like you said. And then that in turn means that I think that where you can find a niche in this business is, if I guess, covering teams, or what we're talking about what used to be columnists, what used to be beat writers and all that, but where you can establish a niche is maybe an information man, or somebody who has spent a long time covering one team, and okay, that's the authority. That's who I want to go to. That's who a fan wants to go to get the real story. And that's not even necessarily to get only the positive spin. it's just to, hey, shoot me straight. You know, I don't want you blowing, pumping sunshine, but I also want you ripping my team to shreds. And so I think, at least as I go about my job, it's that sort of middle ground that I try to strike, or I guess that I've always tried to strike, regardless of whether I've worked for Tiger Illustrated or a newspaper. But it just seems like there are so many people out there with opinions, and we haven't even gotten into Twitter. You know, we're only talking about the talking heads on TV, but good grief. Just so many people out there. And I think one of the positives is, back in the old days, a columnist or a beat writer didn't have to give his readers the time of freaking day, right? Like you had like a letter to the editor in the old days, and then later on, you could have your phone number at the bottom of your articles where they could call and leave a message, and you could choose to call them back or choose not to call them back. And then you had an email address at the bottom of your articles. Well, now, man, if I make a mistake or if I get something wrong or am not really fair in something that I write, I'm going to hear about it like a minute later on my message board or maybe even on Twitter as well. But I think that's good that people like me and others, that the distance has been removed from writers who are sort of in this ivory tower and who basically say, hey, I'm going to write what I think is important and you're going to like it. You're able to interact much more with the people who are paying your salary, which I think is probably pretty important.
I think it is all good. First of all, when you get a lot of reaction, I've gotten reaction before, going back to my days when I was in sports. And I think, as long as you don't pepper me with obscenities or insult me for the start, if you kind of come at me and you're pretty reasonable, although firm in an opinion, there have been a lot of times I've looked at something and said, like, you know what? First of all, if you make a mistake, you want to go back and own up to it quickly, and it's good for people to call you on it. But I also think that it is good to kind of take that, the football coaches have come down from the tower, and now, a lot of the media has as well on all sides of it. So it is, I think, a little bit more close like that. And at the same time, Twitter and Facebook have got that ugliness to it because, as I say a lot of times, when someone is outrageous, you're just going like, there's a lot of bravery behind a keyboard.
Yeah, for sure. I guess maybe one of the casualties of this new landscape, as you've mentioned, like the hardcore fans, they've gravitated to websites like mine or other similar sites at other schools, but there's no sort of voice in the middle, so to speak, in terms of this not covering either team exclusively, right? So like the average, where does the average person in Greenville or Columbia who's not a hardcore fan of either South Carolina or Clemson, where do they go to get just sort of the rudimentary, information or stories on either team? I don't know. I don't know what they do.
Yeah, that's a good question because, we've seen a lot of print have discontinued, specific beat writers. I know that the Herald Journal in Spartanburg no longer covers Wofford games.
Wow.
They'll go and do if there's a good feature story or something to do. But, you see a lot of that. That is a really, really good question. I think that, and they've only get a limited amount of time a night on the air, obviously, but, Pete Yanity on Channel 7 will try to give you just a little bit of a taste of everything, hopefully.
Yep.
A little Clemson, a little Carolina, a little Wofford, a little Furman. You still, obviously, one area where I think that local can still be indispensable is when it comes to high school, if you choose to do it right. And I think the TV stations do because, Friday night's just a war to see who can get the most highlights on the air and who can get the best stuff on the air. Whereas I do think, once again, I don't want to say all print, but a lot of newspapers, the Greenville News, when I worked in Columbia for 3 years, and on Saturday morning, I would buy the Greenville News when I was working in Columbia because their high school section with Tom Layton was that good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that casual sports fan, they've got to kind of do a little bit of searching. I would agree with that. That's interesting.
It's really sad. I think newspapers' demise has largely been self-inflicted because they basically ignored a lot of the desires of their readers. But it's nonetheless really unfortunate because, like you said, there was some great coverage of high school sports, college sports, and everything beyond. You mentioned Twitter in your role. So I try to stay off of it. Mainly because of sanity, and two, because we have a message board on my website that people pay $10 a month to hang out and to visit with me. So why would I go onto Twitter and spend a lot of time hanging out there when I it's my job to be on my website. What do you have a governor, so to speak, on any limits on how much time you spend on Twitter, and what are your interactions like, and just your approach to it, professionally, personally?
Well, I'm on it a lot when I'm at the office, and especially when I'm on the air in the morning. I'm on the air for 4.5 hours in the morning, and while it has a lot of things you don't want to see on it, it also can be an incredible source of information to get on top of a story. And it happened just last week when you had the FAA shut down all departing flights across the country for about 2 or 3 hours on, I can't remember if that was, I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday morning. And it was just suddenly just a few people that were retweeting, people going like, what's going on with planes? We hear the FAA is grounding everything. And then you start seeing more. And then I started really just suddenly using it to get the official FAA account and the official American Airlines and Delta Airlines. And suddenly I've got that on my screen on the set so I can see what these airlines are trying to tell passengers. So in that way, it is invaluable. While I'm in kind of that news gathering mode while we're on the air, because sometimes you'll see something happen, and if you wait around for it to come over the AP broadcast wire that we get, I mean, it's going to be a long time, or certainly a noticeable delay. And so I like it for that. As far as my participation on it, I come on in the morning. I start by putting the weather forecast out that our meteorologist gives. Most of the time, I usually try to be relatively light and just say, some kind of silly things, or I don't try to go I don't get into any politics at all. I don't go anywhere close to there. And I know a lot of people that I know, not at our TV station, who go full in for politics from a local news standpoint. And I don't go anywhere with that. As a matter of fact, my rule of thumb when it comes to politics is that when we come down to a presidential election year in South Carolina, I will vote in one of the primaries. But I don't tell you that I voted today, because if I tell you I voted one day, then you'll know that I voted in either the Republican primary or the Democratic primary. On election day, when it doesn't matter, then I'll say I voted. You should do the same. But I absolutely avoid any mention of politics. I just don't want to get into that. And I don't think I should. I'm kind of old school. I don't think you should know how I vote. And I hope that it doesn't ever influence what I do. And I don't really get much reaction from it. Occasionally I'll get one both ways. So if I figure someone says I'm pro one side or pro the other, I figure like, okay, I must be doing okay then. But you're so right. It can go nuts. So I try to cut myself off after I go downstairs to do the noon news. And then I might kind of look back later in the day just to see what's going on, but you've got to limit your time on there. And I don't like to get into too many jawing matches with people. I'll tell you, the tweet that I put out that got the most reaction, and I say this as an Indiana basketball fan. So the year that Kentucky won the national championship. Now, Indiana and Kentucky used to play every year in basketball, but they stopped the series years ago. Indiana beat Kentucky at Bloomington, and it was kind of a breakthrough when they had been down for a long time. And Calipari then simply said, we're only going to play schools in neutral sites. We're not going to play non-conference home and home. We only do neutral sites, even though they immediately had scheduled UCLA home and home. Be that as it may. So after Kentucky wins the national championship, they're at the White House meeting President Obama. And I put out on Twitter, I said, Kentucky being honored at the White House right now for their winning the national championship. Funny, I figured Calipari would have wanted to meet President Obama at a neutral site. And I didn't think much.
That's good.
I just kind of threw it out there.
That's good.
Well, the next thing I know, I see retweet from Kentucky Sports Radio. And the next thing I know,
Matt
my
Jones.
timeline is exploding. Probably the way yours did a couple of times last Thursday on your scoops. But anyway, and then people are coming at me, and a lot of them are mad and they're cussing. And I'm just going like, it was just a joke.
Yeah.
You won the national championship. You had a great team. But man, it's amazing the fire. It's like you write, whatever it is, 280 characters, whatever it is, and you hit send. And I mean, that could be napalm, with flamethrowers. It's incredible what can happen.
It's just last week, or maybe over the weekend, after Shane Beamer took on whatever radio station that is in the Upstate for saying whatever about him not being able to get Garrett Riley, and he shamed their Twitter following at only 8,000 and this. I mean, that was just, I'm not used to seeing head coaches do that. I'm sorry, but it's just, I mean, I'm more entertained by it than anything. And so I tweeted something to the effect of, I did a screen cap of, if the little, when it's not the egg anymore, it's like the shadow person on Twitter, the little, when people who don't pick their avatars, they don't pick a picture. Yeah. And I said, we're not far away from Shane Beamer just eviscerating one of these guys.
I saw that.
And I, it was just a joke, just like yours.
Was a joke.
Yeah. And so and this is the best part, South Carolina fans clapping back at me saying, yeah, I'm not sure why that offended you. And I'm like, I am definitely not offended. I think you and Shane Beamer definitely are about something that should be trivial. But yeah, I think the bottom line, Fred, is the lesson here that you gradually learn, and that I'm definitely imparting to my children is, man, if you want to argue with somebody or have a disagreement, do it over the phone, do it in person, because with your thumbs or your fingers, it's just what you're thinking is just not necessarily going to go over that way when you're just sitting there typing. And it's just kind of a hard lesson for a lot of people, because a lot of people just make total fools of themselves out there, unfortunately.
I agree. The one thing about, you mentioned that thing with Shane Beamer, and I read some of the reactions to it, and some of them thought, well, he's really sticking up for his program, so good for him. And I was sort of like you, kind of going like, I don't know why you're helping, because that's what you're doing. You're helping these people by doing it. I understand your reaction and you want to do something, but I just thought that was, and that's probably about the closest thing you would get to that Ken Berger headline today. Yeah. If a coach would engage a media member, something like that. And I guess he kind of did that with
Sapikoff,
with Gene Sapikoff over the same topic. It's incredible how much gets generated about the hiring of offensive coordinators. The biggest thing I learned and how different football was in the South was when the first time I was on the sidelines, and again, I worked in Columbia for 3 years for a South Carolina football game, and I heard fans screaming at the offensive coordinator at that time was a guy named Frank Sadler, and they were yelling at him by name. I'm going like, they pick out the coordinators by name. They don't do the coach. And the one thing I've always kind of wondered about coaches too is, when they talk about offensive coordinators or whatever, and you're chewing out the OC, in that case, I'm kind of going like, well, Joe Morrison's the coach. Does he not know what plays going in there? Maybe he didn't, but I just, that was the real thing. I said, like, okay, this is a different place. I mean, my second game in the South that I saw was in 1984. It was Clemson at Georgia.
Oh, wow. The Kevin Butler.
And that was the Kevin Butler 60-yard, Larry Munson saying, oh, my God, oh, my God. And it was an amazing football game, and I had never seen an atmosphere like that. Of course, everyone's stadiums are 15, 20,000 seats larger now. But that was my second football game in the South. And I talked to my brother who went to Illinois the next day. He said, it's like, so is it bigger than the Big Ten? I said, like, there is no comparison. It's like, it's high. The Big Ten is high school in intensity compared to here. Yeah, okay, Ohio State, Michigan. But for the most part, I'd never seen anything like it. Of course, you get to experience it in some of the other places, but wow.
So, okay, you say, I've never seen anything like it. That day, that was your introduction. What was it? What were the sights and sounds that just sort of floored you?
You just walked in there, and it was just everybody's wearing Georgia red or the little snippets of Clemson orange. It's a gorgeous day. It's loud from the start. Georgia had the whole organized cheer for every kickoff. The band played that little, I can't remember which song it is. Every time they get a first down, dun, 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 you hear that every time. And kind of like, oh my gosh, Vince Dooley just scratched his nose. Dun, 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 dun. I mean, that's what it felt like. And it was just so really intense. I mean, it was loud. Even the Clemson fans, whatever they got, 7,000 fans or something like that, they were loud, when they would make a play. And it was a crazy ending. I remember Clemson had a really good run back on the kickoff and might have actually been in conceivable range for Donald Igwe-Buike. But the time the officials said the time ran out. There was no time left on the clock. But it was just such an intense game and back and forth. And I mean, it was big time football. It was just such an experience. And again, I just had never heard fans that intense for that long. I mean, they go in there and they watch warm-ups.
Yeah.
I'm like, I would be out at the tailgate party if I was them until, a sufficient amount of time before coming in. But the first game I saw was South Carolina and the Citadel. And it was a night game in Columbia, and the Citadel.
They almost beat them.
They almost beat them. South Carolina ran a trick play, halfback pulled up and threw to a wide open receiver. So they're up 31-24. Citadel almost ran the kickoff back for a touchdown. I think the one guy got their return man with one hand. And if I want to remember right, I think the guy had 4 fingers.
Wow.
And he got, and it might almost be, I'm trying to remember the play. It's almost what might be a horse collar by today, but he got him with one hand, saved the touchdown. Citadel threw 4 passes in the end zone. South Carolina holds on. Then I go to Clemson, Georgia the next week, only to think that South Carolina winds up going, that's of course the Black Magic season, 10-1. And I'm thinking like, well, this must be like this every year. So, that was even something.
Did you go to Navy that year?
I did not go to Navy that year. But I worked at, we were the TV station that aired the broadcast. And it's the worst television broadcast of a football game I have ever seen. It was, I'm trying to remember who produced it because it was on like a Raycom or something like that. I'm not saying it was Raycom, but it was something like that. And of course, this is just after they've set the world on fire by beating Florida State. and they go up there and it's just like, who are these guys wearing these uniforms? But the thing, they could never get the names of the players or the coaches right. Do you remember back in the old days when the announcer would thank the school and thank the sports information director and all the people who helped them with the broadcast? It's not something they do anymore. Well, I'm starting to listen to it, and it's obvious they pulled a page from South Carolina State because they thank Coach Bill. No, I'm serious. They thank Coach Bill Davis, and they thank sports information director Bill Hamilton.
No way.
And this is in the fourth quarter of the game they've been doing all day. And I mean, the phone's ringing off the hook because, the South Carolina fans are understandably mad about the way the game was going, but then on top of it, this horrible broadcast. And I think that poor Channel 4 ran into the same thing with a disastrous Gator Bowl for Clemson against Syracuse, because I think the announcers called them Clemson the whole game and had a lot of other errors that they just didn't seem to know what one of the teams in orange was doing.
If you're in the Eastern Midlands and PD area and you're in any way interested in buying and selling a home, commercial property, land, need to consider reaching out to Uptown Realty. They're based out of Sumter and run by a friend of mine, Patrick Enzer, big Clemson guy, used to cover the Tigers in a newspaper capacity, longtime supporter of Tiger Illustrated, longtime listener to the Dubcast. The home buying process should be an enjoyable experience, so let Patrick and his staff do all the heavy lifting. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call 803-774-0435 or go to uptownrealtysc.com. When you're ready for a complete renovation in your home or business, open the door to more with Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Their local experienced team will totally transform any room space, from beautiful floor coverings to construction to finished details. Harris handles every step of your renovation process, whether it's a kitchen or living room or an industrial or educational setting, like some of the positively stunning work they've done at Clemson University. Go to discoverharris.com and experience a total renovation transformation from Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Want to share a quick word about Founders Federal Credit Union? If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers. In addition to that, all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership, as well as IPTAY members. Matt Gross is a proud Clemson alum and the vice president for the Clemson market for Founders Federal Credit Union. Matt's office is located beside the Walmart Neighborhood Market on Old Greenville Highway in Clemson. For more information, go to foundersfcu.com. That mid to late 80s was really intense between both of the schools. And one of my favorite sort of memories that was we sort of discovered long after the fact was Danny Ford telling us, I don't know, it was about a decade or so ago, that while he and Joe Morrison were, of course, cutthroat competitors on the field, they were actually friends off of it, and that when Danny would go down to, say, an IPTAY meeting in Columbia, he would stop off and hang out in Joe Morrison's office, and they'd drink beer and just, shoot the crap together. What do you remember from those two?
Right. And I mean, and I love that. And I think that's the way it should be. I still think there's, I know that the Clemson fans, they're a little bit frayed just because, they finally lost the big showdown. But when the two teams played last year in Columbia, the first time that Beamer and Dabo went head to head, and a lot of people got this video. Todd Summers works at Channel 7. It's pinned to the top of his Twitter feed if you want to go and see it. It's just a great scene of Dabo in warm-ups walking down to see Beamer, and Beamer's small son, he just picks him up. Dabo does, and is talking to him, and then you can see these guys just talking. And I know that there's a rivalry, and I know that beating each other will have a lot to do with their job status. Well, not so much for Dabo. I think he's in pretty good shape, but I mean, they could easily be really cutthroat. And it was just actually, I think it's a great video. And so hearing that story about Danny and Joe, I think is great. I had not heard that before.
It is about 3:00 on a Tuesday, and your schedule, I guess, from 2:00 on, you're free. Let's get a look at what your daily schedule is like, what your routine is like. It's kind of fascinating given your responsibilities.
Okay. You are sitting down, correct?
Yes. No, I'm
Okay.
standing up. I have a standing desk, but I'm figuratively sitting down.
Okay. All right. Just kind of grab, something just to be able to hold yourself up. And for anybody listening to this, please be sitting down. And if you're driving, just have two hands on the wheel. My alarm goes off at 1:40 in the morning.
Oh, my goodness.
I pause for the audible groan.
Oh, my. So are you about to go to bed in about 10 minutes?
No, I go to bed I probably should go to bed earlier. I go to bed at 7.
Wow.
And I'm pretty good at falling asleep pretty quickly. So, hope that's about 6 right there. And a lot of times in the afternoon, I'll probably take a 45-minute nap, but then I'll also exercise in the afternoon too. But yeah, so I go to bed at 7 and wake up at 1:40. I've got 2 alarms. The second goes off. One's plugged in the wall. One is the phone, and they're 5 minutes apart in case something happens. And I get up and I eat breakfast real quick and jump in the shower, and I'm on the road to the TV station by 2:30. It's about 25-minute drive, and go in and work on the show. Sometimes I'm writing stuff. Otherwise, I'm kind of editing the scripts that I go through. I do that right up to airtime, and maybe even for about 15 or 20 minutes during commercials when I'm on the air. I've been writing a lot of sports lately. The producers just say, like, hey, we want to put in South Carolina beating Kentucky. Will you write that? Because they don't want to. I say, like, that's fine. And then the next day it was Clemson, Louisville. And of course, then we got to Friday and everything. And of course, you had the huge situation with Clemson football. So I kind of do that on the air from 4:30 to 9. I eat lunch right at 9 in the morning. That's lunchtime for me. And work on the noon show. And then I work on some other things. I've got a segment I do once a week called First Responder Friday. And we do profiles of police officers, 911 operators, a lot of firefighters. We're always looking for something different. As a matter of fact, we are doing one that airs this Friday. We're doing it on sports athletic trainers, obviously following the Damar Hamlin situation, because a trainer was the first responder out there. And Watford, we kind of featured them because they had a player who went into cardiac arrest by the name of Michael Roach back in 2016. Very similar situation. They finished the game. He's all right, by the way. He had to retire immediately, but he's working here in Spartanburg. We're working in Spartanburg. So we do that kind of thing. So I sometimes am writing. Sometimes I'll go out and shoot that story between shows, or I might go out and shoot that and not do the noon show. That's why sometimes I'm not on there, because I'm usually out shooting one of those. But and then basically from 9 to about 12, we're kind of doing stuff for the noon show. And there's some downtime in there, maybe about an hour or so, unless something kind of comes in late breaking. And I leave at 12:30 on the dot. Show goes there at 12:27, the noon show, and I'm usually in my car by 12:30. Now, the one thing about the ridiculous morning hours, that this is what I use to justify it. My weekend starts at 12:30 on Friday. The traditional Gordon Dill, Amy Wood, P. Yannity weekend starts at 11:30 on Friday night. So I will trade Friday afternoon and Friday night for Sunday night and Monday morning. That's the little bit that I'll take with it. There's not too many real 9 to 5 TV jobs. So, and that's pretty much it. Now, the other thing I have to do on a Friday night, if I'm going to watch something that's going to interest me, I need to take a nap in the afternoon. Otherwise, I'm a 9 p.m. head bopper, just sitting in the chair, and I might be watching a show with my wife. She'll say, like, "Are you awake? Finish it tomorrow, go to bed."
So you get into work at 2:30?
3, right before 3, about 25-minute drive. Yeah, I leave the house at 2:30.
Okay, I see. And then your show starts at 6.
No, we
5.
go on the air at 4:30.
Oh, 4:30. Okay.
We're on from 4:30 until 9.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a big chunk.
So,
and really pretty much everybody else, Channel 21 is 4:30 to 9. We do 2.5 hours on Channel 7, and then the other 2 hours we do on our sister station, Channel 62. Channel 4, for instance, does not do 7 to 9.
So when the Super Bowl Sunday, when the game's starting, you're getting ready for bed.
I will make an exception for the Super Bowl and make it to halftime, and then I go to bed. So, and there's been, a lot of times where there will be a game that I'll miss. My favorite one, Clemson fans, please don't be upset with me when I bring this story up. So I go to bed and don't watch 1 minute of the Orange Bowl when they played West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I wake up the next morning, everybody in the house is asleep, and I go and I grab my phone and I look to see what the score is. And I see 70-35. I'm like, did they play basketball too that night?
You gave Clemson 2 extra points there. Sorry, it was 70-33.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Okay, forgive me.
Sorry.
Gosh, I'm just like 70. I was like, what? And there was another time when they played the Alabama semifinal game with Kelly Bryant at quarterback. I said, like, okay, wake me up if it's looking pretty good. And my alarm went off, and I said, that's not a good sign, because I couldn't even make it up for when they won the first national championship, when they beat Alabama in Tampa. I was sleeping through most of it, and then my wife came in and woke me up. She said, you need to get out here and see this. I said, okay. And we're watching it. My daughter's up, and she was still in high school at that point. And so I watched the end of the game, and then I was just too charged up to go back to bed. So I finally had to go back and watch the rest of it on replay the next day. But that was a great memory. The great thing about, by the way, being, in news, but still getting to do some sports, is that for 3 of the national championship games, I also got to go to that game to work for Channel 7. I did it from the news side. So I was kind of doing not so much any kind of X's and O's about the game. So I did get to go to the championship game in Phoenix and in New Orleans and in San Jose or San Francisco or Santa Clara, wherever we played that game out west. So they're 1 and 2 in games that I attended, but that was also really cool. And all those nights, those are all nighters, because we do everything going into the game, 4:00 until right up to kickoff. And then we cover the game, and then I'm on the morning show the next day. So national championship games are a blast, but man, we don't get much sleep.
I mean, I know how hard it is to write coherently when I've been covering a marathon, for 5-6 hours. I can't imagine how difficult it is to be in front of a camera and speak coherently on live television when you've done something like that.
That's a great point. And the one thing I do in the morning under those circumstances is I really, really script it. So I'm kind of maybe rehashing something, or I think we've had maybe Pete Anady did the highlights, or he put together a piece on it. But basically, I don't really leave a lot of room for me to ad-lib too much. I stick to a pretty strict script for both times you see me each hour, from wherever it is, New Orleans or something like that. And also, I'm not a coffee drinker at all. I've never had a drop of coffee, but I will down some Cokes during that. So
you pay pretty close attention, obviously, to Clemson. You read my writings, you listen to my podcast when you don't really have to, because you can, you're more of a surface level guy. You don't cover sports deeply anymore. Is that just because you're just interested, and you do the same thing with South Carolina? You just like following, like reading about and following both of the schools in the state, or do you maybe lean more toward Clemson? How does that work?
I do like to just follow them because it's still kind of my nature. I mean, I still love doing sports. The main reason that I got out of it, and I don't blame anybody who stays in it for their entire careers. The main reason that I decided to get out of it was just family considerations, was that I was married. I got married when I was 38. We had our daughter when I was 40. And, I spent 2 straight New Year's Eves in Tampa by myself pretty much, waiting to cover a bowl game, South Carolina, Ohio State. Meanwhile, my family's up here celebrating, and it's all those nights and weekends. And even though morning news has got a very irregular schedule to it from everybody else, it's still kind of a set one. And I was able to really do so much more family-wise, which worked out great. Again, the little bit of sports I get to do on the side kind of scratches that itch, but still in my heart, I still love doing it. So, yeah, I'm still really interested in what's going on with the major sports at Clemson, even though I don't cover them. I also keep up on South Carolina. To be honest, I do keep up more with Clemson because, again, I've been lucky enough to get to do, a lot of sports over there, again, a lot of fall sports and some of their spring sports. So, and, you talk to everybody enough over there. So I don't want to say fan, but I just certainly am more interested. I've had people, I've written something about Clemson on my, on Twitter before, and people will say like your team. I'm going like, well, I'm not saying they're my team. First of all, I'm a masochist as a football fan because I went to Indiana. So, between Indiana and being a fan of the Colts, I mean, I that's a lot of bitterness to try to absorb. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No. But so it's still part of that's in me. So I just kind of like to know what's going on. But I also miss some things. There's times where I'll call Pete Yandy in the afternoon, or I might text Mickey Plyer and they say like, "Hey, when did this happen?"
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have my finger on the pulse of everything, but I still try to keep up.
I was going to say, it always amuses me if I make an observation on Twitter about another team, whether it's, boy, Stetson Bennett really proved the doubters wrong or something like that, or God forbid, an observation on South Carolina's football team. It's, why are you cover Clemson? How dare you make a comment on other teams? It's just like, dude, I watch college football. I think I'm allowed to make a comment on other football teams. They view it as almost as like I'm an employee of Clemson. I'm on the staff or something.
Right? Exactly. Exactly. You're giving opinions on football. Meanwhile, this is something I cover, but I also watch other things. Yeah, I saw. You got into some skirt. Oh, I remember you made a great point about the Heisman Trophy, and because somebody, I can't remember.
It was Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic.
Okay, that's who it was. Who just kind of made this general statement about, if you don't do your Heisman vote this way, then you shouldn't have one. I'm like, well, no.
Yeah, I'm disappointed.
You basically, with much better points than me, said no.
She said, I'm disappointed in the voters because the reason Stetson Bennett is a finalist is only because of the people who voted early and didn't really think beyond, he's on the number one team, which, I did not get that at all. I mean, my logic is there is no set criteria. I mean, it's the loosest criteria, I think, for any award out there. And so you can come up with whatever reason you want to vote for a player. But by the way, she did after the TCU, after Georgia won it all last week, and after Stetson Bennett took home his 4th MVP in the playoffs, postseason, which is just incredible, by the way.
Yeah.
She wrote an apology column.
If he was 6'3", or if he had 5 stars coming out of high school, is he viewed completely differently?
Absolutely, because He has a really good arm, and he has wheels, which is the reason I thought in 2021 I was sold on him halfway through that season, because he was making things happen with his legs that JT Daniels could not, but a lot of other people didn't see it that way at the time. So
yeah, I want to make one more quick point about talking about the Heisman Trophy, because I also, I agree with you. There is no set criteria, which makes me think that I think it's okay to almost consider it not really a lifetime achievement award, but I look at it this way. The 4 biggest football games that Deshaun Watson played in, the 4 playoff games, as far as the Heisman Trophy is concerned, never happened.
That's
and
right.
I used to know his numbers, and you've probably looked it up before too. You look at his numbers from those 4 games; those are the toughest teams he's going to play. He had incredible numbers, and the same thing for Lawrence. Well, okay, I know the Ohio State loss in his last game, but still, he had incredible numbers in the 5 playoff games that he played in overall. But otherwise, those don't count. I'm thinking like Stetson Bennett did something to win the national championship last year. So I've always thought he was overlooked. I don't know how you kind of justify that, but everyone always says like, oh no, you can't take into account previous years. And I'm like, well, why not?
Yeah. Fred, is there anything else about you that I have neglected to ask about that is you think we should talk about? I'm not talking about a police record or anything. I'm just I'm just curious if I've missed anything.
Odd things that I got to do, believe it or not. You might find this insane. I do looking back at it, but there was actually a reason I did it. I hosted the 2003 Miss South Carolina Pageant.
Wow.
The TV station televised it for maybe 5 or 6 years in the early 2000s. And this was the first year. And they came and asked me if I would do it. And one of the reasons I did it, this is, I'm not going to ever go skydiving, and I'm not going to handle live rattlesnakes. But even though I'm on TV for a long time, I still had sort of a fear of getting up in front of, in that case, about 3,000 people at Spartanburg Memorial Auditorium. And the thing was broadcast statewide. And if you looked at the ratings we had back then, a whole different era. I mean, it was the most watched show on TV that night in this area. But I kind of did that in one thing to sort of conquer that fear. I don't know if I did a particularly good job or not. I was not asked back. That's okay. I got up. I was in a rented tux. I did it once. I think I got it on and got it off in one piece. I did not Steve Harvey. I got the right winner's name. Although the process that I was promised would be the foolproof process to announce that, they didn't really follow it. They simply scribbled the name of the winner on the back of a card. Like, is this right? So, but I did do that. That was my one other thing that I've done that's really, really out of the ordinary. But no, but outside of that, it's been really, really fun to do everything I have. I mean, again, I've been at Channel 7 now. It'll be 36 years in April. I got no plans on slowing down anytime soon if they'll have me. And we seem to be getting along well. And I've just been really lucky. When you go look for your first job in this business, one place I applied to was in Marquette, Michigan. Have you ever looked at Marquette, Michigan on a map?
I've never heard of Marquette, Michigan.
Marquette, Michigan is a tiny town on top of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. You remember when you look at like an old school map and there's like yellow around a major city? I think you could take a ruler and put it on a map and not find any yellow for that full 1 foot. That's how far in the middle it was. And instead, I got a chance to come down and work on a TV station in Columbia and in South Carolina. And this has become my home now. So I consider myself to be incredibly lucky. When I was in sports, I had the chance to see a ton of stuff. I've been to 3 Super Bowls. I got to cover the Masters for pretty much 18 straight years, the Heritage for 18 straight years. We used to really follow the Atlanta Braves, so I've been to the World Series numerous times. Been with Clemson to 3 national championship games. I've been to NCAA tournaments with them. I was in East Rutherford when Tate George hit that ridiculous shot for UConn to break their hearts in the Sweet 16. I was there for that. So I've had a chance to see a lot, and it's been a great ride, and I can't wait to see what's next because I'm not going anywhere.
Pretty remarkable, how when you first get into the business, you're like, I'm going to climb the ladder. I can't be at one spot for more than 2 years, and I got to keep advancing. And then your priorities start to change, as you mentioned, with family and adjusting your schedule accordingly to where you can spend time with them. And kind of crazy how it all sort of shakes out and the professional aspirations sort of even out. And man, if you can find something that satisfies both the professional and personal with your family, then you really have it figured out. And it sounds like you really do.
I think I do. And I think you're right on all that. Again, the job I'm doing in Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, I would be doing the same job in New York, but I am much happier here.
Fred Cunningham, glad we could connect. And, man, I hope to see you sometime. I don't think we've ever met in person, but I look forward to it whenever it does happen.
Hopefully bump into maybe at a baseball game coming up here in the next couple of months. That would be great.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for joining us.
Larry, thank you. And, again, pleasure to have spent a few minutes with you. Well, more than a few minutes, but it was fun. It flew by. And, again, big fan of your work, and it was a pleasure.
All right, great stuff there. Really appreciate Fred's kind words, but also his support of TigerIllustrated.com and the podcast. Avid listener, sounds like. That's really cool to hear. Appreciate the support of our sponsors for helping make this happen. And most of all, thanks to every one of you for hitting that play button. Be back next week. Cheers.